What would you do if a teenage janitor's daughter walked into your billion-dollar boardroom and pointed out the one clause that could destroy everything? The fluorescent lights of the 27th floor flickered slightly as Maya Carter pushed the mop bucket forward, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. 16 years old, hoodie sleeves rolled up, visitor badge hanging from her neck. She wasn't supposed to be seen, let alone heard. But today would be different. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, she could see suits and sharp heels clustered around a long walnut table. At the head sat Julian Westmore, CEO of Westmore Capital. Next to him, his poised wife, Vivian Westmore. The man across the table, Richard Vale, smiled with polished teeth and fingers draped over a contract. Maya's eyes were drawn to that document. Page 14. Her stomach tightened. It started earlier that evening. Her mum, Angela Carter, had clocked in on time, vacuum strapped to her back, earbuds in. Maya had tagged along like always, helping clean after business hours. A stack of shredded files, a forgotten sandwich on a desk, corporate things she never asked about. Until she saw it, a folder left in the copier tray labeled Final Merger Agreement. The name Richard Vale jumped off the page, and then she read it. Really read it. Subparagraph C, line 3. A liability clause. It sounded official, but Maya had watched enough business documentaries with her grandfather to recognize language designed to confuse. It shifted all merger liability to Westmore Capital. If lawsuits or debt surfaced, Richard's firm walked free. Julian's would take the hit. She couldn't stay silent. Now, back in the present, her hands trembled as she stepped closer to the boardroom. Julian's pen hovered just above the signature line. "Excuse me, sir," Maya said, her voice steady but quiet. The entire room froze. Julian turned slowly. "Who are you?" "She's just the janitor's daughter," someone muttered. Maya ignored it. "That clause on page 14. It flips liability. If you sign it, your company takes the fall." Richard chuckled. "What is this, a prank?" Vivian narrowed her eyes. She shouldn't be here. But Julian didn't laugh. He picked up the contract, flipped to the page, his brow furrowed. Angela, still in her janitor's uniform, appeared in the hallway. "Maya, what are you doing?" "I read it," Maya said, turning to her mother. "They're setting him up." Vivian rose from her seat. "Enough! Escort her out!" Security moved swiftly. Maya didn't resist. But as the door shut behind her, she looked back and locked eyes with Julian. Something passed between them. Doubt. The pen never touched the paper. Later that night, in the small apartment they called home, Maya sat at the kitchen table, fingers still twitching from adrenaline. Angela paced behind her, quiet and angry. "You embarrassed us," her mother whispered. "I was trying to stop a mistake," Maya replied. Angela didn't speak. The silence was louder than a scream. But upstairs, Julian Westmore was no longer thinking about mergers. He sat in his office, rereading subparagraph C. The girl had been right. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure who he could trust. Not even his wife. It had only been hours since Maya Carter was escorted out of the boardroom, but in her mind, the moment replayed like a loop. Julian's pen hovering. Her voice cutting the air. The heavy silence that followed. She sat in the lobby's security office now, hands folded in her lap, chin held high. Her heart pounded, but she didn't cry. No one offered her water. No one explained what would happen next. Across from her, her mother, Angela Carter, sat stiffly in the corner chair. She hadn't said a word since they were pulled from the night shift and told to wait downstairs, but the worry in her eyes said it all. "I'm sorry, Mom," Maya whispered. Angela turned her head slowly. "You should be," she replied flatly. "I cleaned this building to keep food on the table." Not so you can march into boardrooms like you run the place. Maya looked down. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I saw something dangerous. I couldn't let him sign it. Angela didn't respond at first. Then, softer, she added, I raised you to be brave, Maya, but not reckless. Before Maya could answer, the door swung open. A woman in a tight grey suit, clipboard in hand, stepped into the room. Mrs. Carter, she said without looking up. You and your daughter have been placed on leave, pending internal review. Angela's lips tightened. She stood and took Maya's arm. Come on. As they stepped out of the building, the cold Chicago air slapped their cheeks. Maya glanced up once at the towering steel and glass structure behind them. It used to feel like a place full of possibilities. Now, it felt like a wall she might never be allowed behind again. Meanwhile, 30 stories up, Julian Westmore sat alone in his private office. The unsigned contract lay in front of him like a ticking bomb. He flipped to page 14 again. Subparagraph C, line 3. The wording wasn't just sneaky. It was deliberate, cleverly crafted to appear standard, but it would have destroyed his firm. He rubbed his temple, then leaned back in his chair. How had his legal team missed this? How had he missed this? Vivian's voice echoed in his head from earlier. It's just boilerplate, Julian. Don't overthink it. Trust. That word used to mean something, but now he wasn't so sure. He opened his laptop and began cross-referencing prior contracts from Richard Vale's firm. The patterns were unsettling. Similar clauses, same vague language. Subsidiaries with offshore accounts. It all felt too clean, too coordinated. His phone buzzed. Vivian. He hesitated. Then picked up. You didn't sign it, did you? Her voice was sharp, almost too sharp. No, he said evenly. You're overthinking again, she said. Derek's team is vetted. You're letting that girl get in your head. She saw what none of us did. Vivian laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her voice. She's a teenager, the janitor's daughter. You really want me to believe that's the reason I shouldn't listen? I'm coming up, she said, and hung up. Across town, Maya sat on the worn couch in their small apartment. A mug of cocoa sat untouched in her hands. Angela scrolled through job listings on her phone, jaw clenched. Do you regret it? Maya asked. Angela sighed. I regret that you had to lose faith in grown-ups doing their jobs. Maya didn't argue, but something deep inside her said she hadn't been wrong. A ping broke the silence. An email. From someone named Elliot Graves. Subject line, you saw it too. Maya's eyes widened. She clicked. The message was short. I used to work there. I know what you saw. If you're willing to talk, I'm listening. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she started to type. Because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. That evening, Julian opened a drawer in his office and pulled out an old folder, labeled Westmore Legal Review. Internal inside were risk reports, flagged documents, and a name written in red ink. Graves, Robert, risk too high. Centralized exposure. Julian stared at the page. There was a note in the margin. If they sneak in even one clause, we're exposed. One bad signature, and it all comes down. He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Julian Westmore didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, lit faintly by the glow of downtown Chicago. Vivian lay beside him, perfectly still, her breathing soft and measured, but he could feel the distance between them. It had always been there, but tonight it felt like a chasm. At 3 a.m., he got out of bed and walked barefoot to his office. The contract still sat there, unsigned, its pages spread like a warning. He flipped to page 14 again. Subparagraph C. Maya Carter had seen it in seconds. His legal team, however, hadn't, or wouldn't. He turned on his desk lamp and pulled up more documents, other deals, other partners, other signatures. And slowly, a pattern began to form. Clever phrasing, repeated language, same legal firm names, same shell companies, same results. Julian exhaled. It was no longer a question of whether something was wrong. It was how far it had already spread. Across the city, Maya sat in her small bedroom, the walls lined with old textbooks and taped-up quotes from history's boldest voices. A single lamp lit her face as she scrolled through files Elliot Graves had sent her. Encrypted PDFs, redacted documents, wire transfers that didn't match project budgets. It was more than a mistake, it was a setup. And they were about to walk right into it. Her mother knocked gently on the door. "You're still up?" Angela asked. Maya nodded. "I think I found something. This guy Derek Valley, he's done this before." There was a merger in Houston. Company collapsed under legal fees. Angela folded her arms. "That's not your fight, Maya. It became mine the moment I saw it." "No one else is doing anything." Angela didn't argue. She stepped inside, sat at the edge of the bed, and looked at the folder on Maya's lap. "You have to be careful. These people, they don't like being exposed." Maya nodded slowly. "I'm not trying to make noise, Mom. I just want the truth out there." In a quiet bar near Lakeshore Drive, Julian sat alone with a glass of club soda. He watched through the glass as his wife, Vivian, entered the lounge with Derek Vale. They didn't see him. Vivian leaned in, laughing softly, her hand brushing Derek's wrist like it had been there before. Derek passed her something small, a flash drive, and when he touched her fingers again, Julian looked away. He stood up and left before rage betrayed him. Back in the apartment, Maya received another message from Graves. "Check Clara's financials. 3 offshore transfers in her name, Cayman, BVI. Zurich." Her breath caught. Vivian Westmore wasn't just complicit. She was part of the engine. And she was married to the man who could stop it all. Julian received a bank alert that same hour. An attempt had been made to move $2.5 million from a dormant reserve account. Blocked, but close. Too close. He stared at the screen, feeling the weight of every assumption he had ever made about trust. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man betrayed. That same night, in another corner of the city, Clara sat with Derek in a private suite overlooking Millennium Park. Her voice was tight, clipped. "He's starting to dig." Derek didn't flinch. "Then we bury him before he reaches the roots." The next morning, an anonymous email arrived in Julian's inbox. No sender name, no subject, just a single audio file. He hesitated, then clicked play. Vivian's voice came first, cool and assured. "He won't question it, not if I push at the right time." Then Derek's voice, low and calculating. "And if he does, we remind him what he has to lose." Julian froze. He played it again, then again. The third time, his hands trembled slightly. He didn't throw anything, didn't scream. He simply forwarded the file to his private attorney. And for the first time in months, he felt clarity. Not the kind that comes with spreadsheets, the kind that cuts through noise and tells you what you've ignored for far too long. Vivian wasn't just standing beside Derek, she was leading the dance. At that moment, Maya stood outside the Harold Washington Library downtown, clutching a folder and the flash drive Graves had mailed her. Her fingers were numb from fear, not the cold, but she pushed through the doors and made her way to the 3rd floor. Computer lab. Far left terminal. As she entered the decryption key, the screen lit up with documents. Not one, not two. 3 previous mergers, 3 collapses. Each one tied to Derek Vale. Each one with the same legal phrasing. And Vivian Westmore's credentials appeared in the approval logs every single time. She wasn't a bystander. She was a partner. That evening, Maya tried to deliver the physical copies to Graves, but when she arrived at his apartment, the door was ajar. Inside, nothing. No sign of struggle. No sign of Graves, only a single envelope on the table labeled MW. Inside was a thumb drive and a sticky note. "They know I helped you. Don't come back. Find someone you trust." Julian Westmore sat in his car outside a shuttered courthouse on the edge of the city. It was nearly midnight. The marble steps were cracked, the windows dark. This building hadn't seen justice in years, but he wasn't here to file paperwork. He was here to speak to someone who didn't care about politics or press-only truth. Her name was Naomi Blake, former prosecutor, now a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on cases everyone else ran from. She arrived without warning, no entourage, no fancy suit. Just a long black wool coat and a leather briefcase in one hand. "Mr. Westmore," she said as she slid into the passenger seat. "I read your message. It's not just about fraud, is it?" Julian exhaled slowly. "It's bigger than that. It's structured, planned, and it nearly destroyed my company." Naomi nodded. "I saw the audio file, the clause, the shell signatures. And the girl?" Julian asked. 16, she said softly. "That makes her more than just a whistleblower. It makes her the reason you're sitting here now." Julian nodded once. "I need to protect her." Naomi looked at him carefully. "And are you ready for what that means?" He didn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, Maya Carter stood outside Westmore Tower once again. This time, no mop bucket, no lanyard. Just a plain backpack slung over her shoulder and a folder clutched in her hands. Security was tighter now. More cameras. More guards. Her name wasn't on the guest list, but as she waited, one junior staffer walked by, a familiar face from the late-night janitor shifts. He hesitated, glanced at the guards, then leaned in. "Mr. Westmore said, if you ever came back, I should take you straight up." 30 minutes later, Julian stood in the doorway of his private conference room. His expression softened the moment he saw her. "You came back," he said. "I brought everything," Maya replied, holding out the folder. Julian didn't take it, not yet. He walked forward and offered his hand. A rare thing from a man like him. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I owe you the truth." Naomi Blake entered behind him, dropping her briefcase on the table. "Let's start unpacking this," she said, glancing at Maya. "This is your war now, but with the right moves, we win before they even know we're fighting." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside were highlighted emails, bank transfer logs, contract copies, and an audio transcript of the message from Graves. "This just came in," she said, "before he disappeared." Naomi nodded. "Let's go through it." They worked for hours. Julian's office slowly transformed into a battlefield, papers taped to the windows, timelines scrawled across whiteboards, pins and red string connecting people, companies, accounts. At the center of it all, Vivian Westmore and Derek Vale. Naomi's voice was low, deliberate. "This isn't just corporate fraud, it's racketeering. Patterned deception. And they're burying it under layers of legitimacy." Maya stared at a list of names, judges, auditors, press contacts. "How do they get away with it?" "Because they expect no one will look past the surface," Naomi replied. "And because people like you don't usually speak." Later that night, Maya and her mom sat on their fire escape, cups of tea in hand. Angela's fingers trembled. "They called again," she said quietly. "Told me if I don't keep quiet, they'll erase your school record. Said they can make you disappear." Maya stared straight ahead. "They already tried." "I'm still here." "You're a child, Maya. This isn't your fight." "It became mine," she said, "the moment they used people like us as their cover." Angela turned and looked at her daughter. not a child. Not anymore. Purpose had replaced fear. The next evening was the Hale Foundation Gala, a legacy event hosted annually by Westmore Capital. Charity, champagne, cameras. The kind of thing Vivian usually orchestrated with military precision. But tonight, Julian took the mic. Standing beneath a chandelier taller than most city trees, he faced the glittering crowd. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to speak to you not as a CEO, but as a man who almost lost everything." Vivian froze near the champagne tower. Her grip tightened around her glass. "I once believed that numbers told the truth," Julian continued. "But numbers don't betray you. People do." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "I've reopened every document our board ever signed. And what I found, what a brave young woman found, shook me." He stepped away from the mic without another word. No names, no accusations. But the message was clear, and Vivian knew it. That night, Maya sat by her bedroom window. A folder of freshly flagged emails rested on her lap. One in particular stood out. "He's starting to pull away. You know what to do." Sent from Vivian to Derek. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, then the screen flickered, the laptop went black. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Stop digging or we dig first." Maya's breath hitched. But she didn't close the laptop. She reached for a Sharpie and wrote 3 words on a clean page. "Not backing down." Because this wasn't about status anymore. This was about truth. And the girl they thought no one would listen to was becoming the voice no one could ignore. Maya Carter woke to a chill in the air and a knot in her stomach. She had spent the night poring over the encrypted PDFs that Elliot Graves had mailed her, pages upon pages of forensic audits, transfer receipts, and contract replicas. It was more than she could fully understand. But what she did grasp made her sick. 3 mergers, 3 companies gutted. Each time, Derek Vale's firm walked away untouched, and in every one of them, Vivian Westmore's approval code sat like a shadow in the margins. She hadn't just been complicit. She'd been practicing, perfecting it, and Julian had no idea. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian Westmore sat at the Gold Leaf Lounge, whiskey untouched. He watched from a corner booth, half shielded by frosted glass, and what he saw curdled his blood. Vivian Westmore, laughing softly, leaning across a candlelit table, resting her manicured fingers lightly over Derek Vale's wrist, the man who nearly gutted his company. Julian's hand tightened around the rock's glass. The gesture wasn't friendly. It was familiar, like a reunion, not a business meeting. Then Derek slid something across the table, a small black flash drive. Vivian took it without hesitation and slipped it into her clutch. She leaned in, whispered something into Derek's ear. Julian didn't hear the words. He didn't need to. The body language told the whole story. Back at home, Maya's phone buzzed. A message from Elliot. "Look into her spending. 3 offshore accounts. Cayman, British Virgin Islands, Zurich." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, she'd pulled up transaction logs from an open-source finance database. There it was. Vivian Westmore, linked to a dormant trust in the British Virgin Islands. The same trust that had received quarterly deposits from companies tied to Vale's mergers. It was clean on the surface, but Maya saw the patterns. The timing, the names. She whispered aloud, "She's not being fooled." "She's helping him." Angela Carter looked up from folding laundry. "Who's helping who?" Maya turned the screen. Angela's eyes narrowed. "That woman's got blood in her teeth and perfume on her lies," Maya snorted. But deep down, she felt cold. It wasn't just about saving a company anymore. It was about exposing a partnership built on manipulation and betrayal. That night, Julian received a call from his bank's internal compliance office. "Sir, Someone attempted a $2.5 million transfer from one of your dormant reserve accounts. We flagged it and stopped it, but the request came with an internal authorization code, registered to Vivian Westmore. Julian's world went silent. She tried to move company funds? Yes, sir. We need you to verify if the request was legitimate. Julian didn't answer. He ended the call, then sat still in the dark, the walls of his penthouse closing in. This wasn't just betrayal, it was invasion. She hadn't just stepped outside the lines. She'd set fire to the map. Across town, in a high-rise suite wrapped in tinted glass, Vivian and Derek stared at the same screen. A transaction error. Blocked. Intercepted. They're watching us, Vivian said coldly. They must be. Derek didn't blink. He poured himself a drink and said, Then we don't wait anymore. She turned sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying, he said, we bury them before they bury us. The next morning, Maya Carter took a bus across town to deliver physical files to Elliot Graves. She hadn't heard from him since the last message. But when she reached his apartment, something was off. The door was slightly open. Inside, silence. No signs of struggle. No sign of Elliot. Just a single envelope on the kitchen counter. Her initials written neatly across the front. M.W. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were two things, a flash drive and a post-it note. They know I'm helping you. Don't come back here. Find someone you trust. Fast! Maya clutched the note tightly. The fear was real now. This wasn't theoretical. Someone had made Elliot disappear. And if she wasn't careful, she'd be next. That evening, Julian parked outside a courthouse long shut down by budget cuts. The inside was dusty and cold. But waiting on the third floor was Naomi Blake. She stood with her back to the window, coat draped over her arm, a single folder in hand. You came, she said quietly. I had to, Julian replied. I can't trust my board. I can't trust my wife. And the one person who saw this coming is a teenager working night shifts. Naomi opened the folder. Inside were early case documents, precedent filings, and a sealed witness protection packet. You want to fight this? We fight it hard, but you'll need to be ready for war. Julian met her gaze. I already am. Later that night, Maya sat in her tiny room, the city glowing beyond the windows. She scrolled through the files Elliot had sent before he vanished. 3 names kept popping up in every deal. Vivian Westmore, Derek Vale, Raven Cross Holdings, a shell company registered in Basel, used to funnel merger kickbacks into private accounts. Julian's company had been used as a pawn, and the architects of the scheme were in his own home and across his boardroom table. Maya leaned back. 16 years old, no business degree, no legal training. Just instinct and a refusal to be invisible. She opened a blank page on her notepad and wrote, If they can hide this in plain sight, what else have they buried? Because this time, she wasn't just following the trail. She was shining a floodlight on it. The ballroom sparkled under 1,000 tiny lights. String quartets played softly in the corner. Laughter clinked against champagne flutes, and at the center of it all, Julian Westmore stood behind the podium at the Hale Foundation's annual gala, adjusting his bow tie with a hand that refused to stop shaking. This night was supposed to be about image. Charity, applause, smooth smiles for the press. Vivian had planned it all, down to the rose gold invitations and the playlist looping in the background. But now she stood near the champagne tower, her grip too tight on the glass stem, her smile a little too fixed. Julian took the microphone. Good evening, he began, voice clear but unsteady. I know tonight was meant to be a celebration, but before we begin, I need to speak not as a CEO, but as a man who made a mistake. The room stilled. Some raised their brows, others shifted uncomfortably. Vivian didn't move. I believed success came from knowing everything, from trusting only what could be measured in dollars and decimal points. But numbers don't betray you. His voice dropped lower. People do. A murmur rippled across the room. Eyes turned, many toward Vivian. I've reopened every document signed by this company's board in the last 5 years. What I found, or rather what one young woman found, has shaken me. He paused. She's not an executive, she's not on payroll. She's not even old enough to vote, but she saw what none of us did. Vivian's glass shattered against the marble floor. She didn't flinch. Julian stepped back from the mic. Applause never came, just silence. And then the whispers began. Back at home, Maya Carter sat by her bedroom window, a single folder open on her lap. She had finally flagged a series of emails between Vivian and Derek. One line stood out. He's starting to pull away. You know what to do. Her fingers trembled as she transferred the file to a secure drive. The room flickered. Then her screen went black. Her phone buzzed. One message. No number, just 4 words. Stop digging, or we dig first. Her heart pounded, but she didn't power down. She opened a fresh page in her notebook. In bold, she wrote, "Not backing down." The next morning, the financial district buzzed with rumors. Coffee machines and boardrooms churned with speculation. Whistleblower. Holt-on merger. Westmore's speech. Inside Hale Investments, internal reviews swept through every department like wildfire. Compliance teams worked overtime. IT froze select accounts. Legal counsel whispered behind closed doors, and for once Julian Westmore didn't hide. He stood in the center of it all. Calm, clear-eyed, ready. At his penthouse, Vivian sat alone in the white silence of their designer kitchen. Her phone pressed to her ear. "They're coming for us," she whispered. Derek Vale's voice on the other end was smooth as ever. "Let them," Vivian hissed. "You said the files were buried." "They were. Someone dug them up." "You don't get it," she snapped. "It's not Julian leading this. It's that girl, the janitor's daughter." There was a pause. Then Derek's tone shifted. Low, cold. "Then maybe it's time we remind the world who holds the real power." At school, Maya tried to keep her head down, but whispers followed her like shadows. Some classmates stared. Others avoided her altogether. A few called her a hero. One note fell from her locker. She opened it. "We know where you live. Stay silent." "Stay safe." She blinked, then tucked the note into her pocket and walked straight to the principal's office. By afternoon, Naomi Blake had filed an emergency protection order for both Maya and her mother. That night, Angela Carter held Maya's hands in silence. "I didn't raise you to fight billionaires," she whispered. "I didn't plan to," Maya replied. "But they came after the wrong kid." Elsewhere, Julian received another message. No number. Just 4 words. "She's not worth it." He stared at the screen, then dialed Naomi. "Can you get federal eyes on this?" "They're watching," she said, "but we need someone willing to testify." Silence. Then he exhaled. "Then I will." The next morning, the front page of the Chicago Tribune screamed, "CEO exposes internal conspiracy, teen whistleblower tied to 2B scheme." Maya's name was withheld, but her image cropped from a school website circulated across talk shows, news panels, and social media. Some praised her, some questioned her, but no one ignored her. At a press briefing, Julian stood at a podium between Naomi and 2 federal agents. "I was blind," he said simply, "not just to fraud, but to courage." He looked into the cameras. "A 16-year-old girl saved my company, the same company that never saw her beyond her mother's uniform." The crowd fell silent. "She saw what we refused to." And from this day forward, we will see her. That afternoon, Maya returned home. A crowd stood outside her building. Neighbors, strangers, reporters. And in their hands, handmade signs. We believe Maya. Truth has no age. Angela Carter gripped her daughter's hand. They're not here to scare you. They're here to thank you. But across the city, in a glassy high-rise, Derek Vale stared at a freeze frame on his tablet, Maya. Climbing courtroom steps, poised, he didn't smile. He turned to Vivian, pacing behind him. She's still a kid, Vivian snapped. You really think they'll let her bring us down? Derek didn't blink. Kids don't bring down empires, he said. Then he stood. Symbols do. He closed the tablet, his voice colder than steel. Let's break her, before she becomes one. The courthouse steps groaned beneath the weight of flashing cameras, murmuring crowds, and the tension of a city on edge. Grey clouds hovered low over downtown Chicago, but inside courtroom 12B, the atmosphere was heavier than the weather outside. Julian Westmore adjusted his tie with a breath that barely reached his lungs. Beside him, Naomi Blake stood tall and focused, shuffling through notes with the calm precision of a surgeon. 2 rows behind them, Maya Carter sat quietly. Hair neatly braided, blouse pressed, hands folded in her lap, except for the one clutching the hem of her skirt. She wasn't here to make a statement. She was here to make a record. Across the aisle, Derek Vale lounged like a man above consequence. Beside him sat Vivian Westmore, poised and motionless, a mask of neutrality over eyes that had once sparkled with control. All rise, the bailiff announced. The judge entered. The room stood. Then the trial began. Naomi opened the case with precision. No fireworks, no dramatics. Just facts. She walked the jury through dates, contracts, encrypted files, offshore transfers. She showed how corporate responsibility had been misdirected through legal trickery, liability clauses flipped, buried authorizations, and the careful laundering of guilt. At the center of the web, Derek Vale, and the silent nods of Vivian Westmore. Neither flinched. Not yet. Then came the moment the court had waited for. Your Honor, Naomi said, rising slowly, we call Maya Carter to the stand. A whisper spread like wind through dry leaves. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratched. Maya rose, eyes steady. She took the oath with a voice that didn't tremble. Naomi approached gently. Miss Carter, she said, how did you come to be involved in this matter? I was working with my mom. She's part of the cleaning crew, Maya began, clear and calm. I found the contract in a copy room on the 27th floor. The signature at the bottom looked wrong. She paused. I read the fine print. Something didn't sit right. Naomi stepped closer. And what stood out to you? There was a clause buried in the middle, Maya explained. It transferred all merger liabilities to Hale Investments. If something went wrong, only our side would take the hit. Naomi nodded. And why did you speak up? You were 16. No one asked you to. Maya turned slowly. Her eyes met Vivian's, then Derek's. Then returned to the jury. Just because I clean your floors, she said, doesn't mean I don't see the dirt. A stunned silence followed. Even the judge blinked. Vivian's lips tightened. Derek didn't smirk this time. Cross-examination came fast and cruel. Derek's attorney tried to break her. Miss Carter, do you understand legal terminology? Not all of it, Maya replied, but enough to know when something's rotten. You're not an expert, are you? No, Maya said, but I don't need a law degree to spot a trap. A juror nodded. The defense faltered. Then Julian Westmore took the stand. Naomi asked only one question. What made you believe her? He looked straight ahead. My gut said she was right. But more than that, She reminded me of something I forgot. And what was that? Julian turned to Maya. That integrity doesn't depend on job titles. Sometimes the janitor's daughter sees the cracks before the board does. A few jurors smiled. Others sat back reflective. Finally, it was Vivian's turn. She walked to the stand like a woman heading to a board meeting, back straight, expression unreadable. Naomi greeted her politely. Mrs. Westmore, do you recognize this audio file? A pause. Then Naomi played it. Clara's voice crackled through the speakers. He won't question it, not if I push at the right time. Then Derek's voice. And if he does, we remind him what he has to lose. Vivian closed her eyes. And for the first time, her composure cracked. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she whispered. I thought, if I could push it through, Julian would never know. And when Maya exposed it, Naomi's voice was soft. Vivian swallowed. I wanted her gone. She saw everything I worked so hard to bury. There it was. No spin, no denial, only guilt. Outside, the crowd had grown. Signs now read, Let her speak. Justice for Maya. Power needs witnesses. Maya slipped through the side door after court. Julian followed. You didn't have to come, she said. I owed you, he replied, for not seeing you sooner. She nodded. You're getting there. Inside the courtroom, Derek Vale and Vivian sat in silence. The jury stared not at two executives, but two architects of betrayal. Not just of finance, but of trust. Of truth, of a girl no one thought would speak. Tomorrow the jury would deliberate. Tonight, the world waited. And in one corner of Chicago, a girl with quiet fire in her eyes stared out the window, knowing the battle wasn't over. But the truth was no longer hiding. And she was no longer alone. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Reporters whispered outside. Cameras hung still on their tripods. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Inside courtroom 12B, every seat was filled. Maya Carter sat between her mother and Naomi Blake, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. Julian Westmore stood just behind them, a quiet pillar of support. Across the room, Derek Vale leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk on his lips. Vivian Westmore stared at the polished wood of the defense table, her hands folded tightly. The judge entered. All rise. Everyone stood. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. The moment had arrived. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty. Guilty on conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Guilty on falsifying financial records. Guilty on obstruction of justice. Each word struck like a drumbeat, slow and final. Derek's smirk disappeared. Vivian closed her eyes. Julian exhaled, and Maya simply closed her hands a little tighter, not in fear, but in finality. The judge wasted no time. 10 years in federal prison, he said, his voice unwavering. No parole within the first 7. A gasp rippled through the room, but Maya didn't flinch. She had walked through fear already. This was the other side. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. Flashes burst like fireworks. Maya, how does it feel to bring justice? Mr. Westmore, will you rebuild the company? Naomi, what's next for your young witness? But Maya answered only one question. What do you want the world to remember? She looked directly at the nearest camera. That truth doesn't depend on your title. Her voice was clear. And justice doesn't care how clean your shoes are. Then she turned and walked away. Not running from the spotlight, but not chasing it either. Just moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Hale Investments didn't collapse. It reformed. Julian initiated a full restructuring of the company. Vivian's name was erased from board documents. Derek Vale's assets were frozen. Naomi Blake was appointed Chief Ethics Counsel. And Maya? She was offered a full academic scholarship, under a new program announced by Julian himself. At a press conference inside the very building she once cleaned, Julian took the stage. "Today, Hale Investments announces the Maya Carter Fellowship," he said, "for young minds with vision and courage." He paused, scanning the room. Maya didn't just save a company, she reminded us who we are supposed to be. Applause broke out like a wave, and Maya stood beside him, blazer over a white blouse, her head held high, not proud but steady. Like someone who had already seen too much to pretend anymore. That evening, Julian sat in his office. He wasn't alone. Maya stood across from him, holding a manila envelope. "I got my Columbia acceptance letter," she said, eyes shining. Julian smiled. "You earned more than that," he said. "You've got a seat at any table you want now." Maya hesitated, then asked, "Do you regret it?" Julian turned to look out over the skyline, lights glowing gold against the early dusk. "I regret that I didn't see it coming," he said quietly, "but I don't regret who stood up when I couldn't." She nodded, then placed the envelope gently on his desk. Across the state line, Vivian Westmore was processed into a federal facility in Wisconsin. She made no statement, filed no appeal. Only silence. Her empire had shrunk to a concrete room and a metal cot. She replayed the words that undid everything again and again. "Just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt." Each time they hit harder. Each time they echoed longer. And in a quiet office above the city, Julian placed Maya's acceptance envelope on a shelf beside his most treasured awards. He added a plaque just below it. It read, "Truth isn't loud, but it lasts." Then he sat back and closed his eyes. Because sometimes it doesn't take a CEO, a lawyer, or a billionaire to rebuild a broken empire. Sometimes it just takes a girl who wouldn't stay silent, and the courage to believe that the truth, even whispered, can be enough to shake the tallest towers. The victory didn't come without cost. 3 days after the verdict, Maya Carter's name was leaked. It wasn't official. But the internet didn't wait for facts. Within hours, her face was everywhere. Talk shows called her the janitor's daughter who toppled titans. Others called her a disruptive child with dangerous ambition. Her school locker was defaced. Her mother's job was quietly eliminated due to restructuring. But Maya didn't flinch. She knew the game hadn't ended. It had only changed arenas. In a dimly lit hotel suite far from downtown, Derek Vale wasn't smiling. He sat across from a woman in a navy coat, her expression sharp, her tone colder. "We underestimated her," the woman said. "No," Derek replied. "We underestimated what she meant to him." He tossed a folder onto the table. Inside, photos, surveillance, schedules. Maya walking to school, Julian leaving his office, Naomi entering a courthouse. "You sure you want to go that route?" the woman asked. Derek's voice was quiet. "They went public. They turned truth into theater. Now we give them a finale they won't forget." Meanwhile, inside Hale Investments, Julian stood before a whiteboard full of red lines and circled names. He traced a finger along one name. Ravenfall Holdings. Naomi leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We dug into Clara's offshore activity," she said. "Turns out she was just the entry point. There are 7 shell companies, all linked back to Vale." Julian rubbed his eyes. "How much time do we have?" Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a file marked Internal Threat Matrix. "Maya's on the list," she said softly. "So is your head of security." Julian froze. That night, Maya sat on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by piles of legal printouts. Her mother walked in carrying tea. "You should sleep," she said gently. "I can't," Maya whispered. "They're planning something, I can feel it." Angela sat down beside her. "You already did more than most adults ever would." "I haven't finished," Maya replied. "They're still trying to bury the truth." Angela wrapped an arm around her shoulders. then we don't let them. At the same moment, a meeting took place in an underground garage. Derek Vale and two men in suits handed over a briefcase. "Discredit the testimony," he said. "Find something, fabricate it if you have to. But if it leaks," one man began. "It won't," Derek snapped. "This time, we control the story." The next morning, a tabloid headline appeared on street corners: "Teen hero or planted whistleblower?" Shocking new questions about Maya Carter. It featured a blurry image of Maya in a hoodie, half a quote pulled from her school essay. "Sometimes systems must be broken to be rebuilt." By noon, social media was ablaze. Some defended her. Others called for investigation. Julian slammed the paper on the table. "They're using her words against her." Naomi nodded. "We need to get ahead of it." But Maya didn't hide. She walked into a live interview that afternoon, wearing the same hoodie from the courtroom. She faced the camera, calm and clear. "My name is Maya Carter," she said. "I'm not part of any conspiracy. I saw something wrong and I spoke up." She held up the original clause from the contract. "I was 16 when I read this. I'm 17 now. What I said then hasn't changed." The reporter blinked. "And if they come after you again?" "They already did," Maya replied. "But the truth hasn't changed either." That night, Naomi received a call from a whistleblower in the Cayman Islands. An accountant from Vale's firm, scared, anxious. He had documents, transfers, internal memos. But he wouldn't email them. Only one name made him feel safe: Maya. "She's not a lawyer," Naomi argued. "No," the voice said, "but she's the only one who didn't sell me a dream. She just told the truth." Meanwhile, Vivian Westmore received a visit in prison from her sister. They hadn't spoken in years. "I saw the news," her sister said softly. "You could have stopped him." Vivian stared through the glass. "I tried to control it," she said, "but in the end, I was part of it." Her sister stood to leave. "You still are." Maya met the accountant the next morning in a bookstore cafe downtown. He handed her a USB. "It's all there," he said. Everything Derek tried to bury: shell company connections, even bribes to regulatory staff. Maya looked down at the drive, then back at him. "Why now?" "Because you reminded me that the janitor's kid is still watching," he said. She nodded once, pocketed the drive, and walked out. Outside, Naomi was waiting in a black SUV. "You ready?" she asked. Maya climbed in. "As I'll ever be." That night, Julian sat in his office again. The skyline shimmered, but his eyes were fixed on a folder marked Operation Nightfall, Evidence for Federal Submission. Inside were pages of data. And on the cover, in Maya's handwriting, "Let them try to silence us." He smiled faintly. The empire wasn't just rebuilding. It was defending itself. With truth, with grit, with a girl they never thought to watch. And as the city slept, a new war quietly began. Not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in every shadow where secrets had once been safe. The courtroom was so quiet, even the hum of fluorescent lights felt loud. Maya Carter sat in the front row, her blazer too big, her hands folded tightly in her lap. On either side of her sat Naomi Blake and Angela Carter, their shoulders forming a silent wall of protection. In front of them stood Julian Westmore, no longer just a CEO. Today, he was a witness to his own reckoning. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Derek Vale and Vivian Westmore sat across the aisle, still as statues. Vivian's gaze flicked to Maya, unreadable. Derek stared straight ahead. The prosecution laid out the case again. But this time, it wasn't just about fraud. It was about betrayal. A betrayal of trust, of shareholders, of truth. Naomi called witnesses, accountants, former employees, a digital forensic expert. Each one drew a line between the shell companies, the offshore accounts, and the silent signatures that nearly destroyed Hale Investments. But the most powerful testimony came from the least expected source. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Maya Carter." A soft gasp moved through the crowd. She stood, walked to the witness stand, and took her oath. The courtroom held its breath. "Maya," Naomi said gently, "can you tell us, in your own words, how this all began?" Maya's voice was quiet, but steady. "I was cleaning the 27th floor with my mom. I found a folder in the copier. It didn't look right. I read it." "Why did you keep reading?" Naomi asked. Maya glanced at the jury. Just because we clean your floors doesn't mean we don't see the dirt." A ripple passed through the room. Naomi smiled faintly. "And when you realized what the clause meant?" "I spoke up. Even though it meant risking your mom's job? Your safety?" Maya nodded. "Because I knew what I saw. And it wasn't just a mistake. It was a trap." During cross-examination, the defense tried to shake her. "Miss Carter, do you have a law degree?" "No." "Have you worked in corporate finance?" "No." "Then what qualifies you to judge a legal contract?" Maya took a breath. "I wasn't judging it, I just read it. Carefully. Maybe more carefully than the people who were paid to." The jury took notice. Later, Julian took the stand. When asked why he believed her, he didn't hesitate. "Because she saw what no one else did, and because she was right." "And what do you think would have happened if she hadn't spoken up?" Naomi asked. He looked toward Vivian. "This company would have collapsed, and no one in this room would have stopped it." Vivian's lips tightened. Derek's jaw flexed. Then came the final moment. Naomi stood once more. "The prosecution rests." The defense declined to call Vivian or Derek to testify. The jury filed out, and the waiting began. That evening, Maya returned home. The lights were off. Her mother was asleep on the couch, the TV flickering quietly. Maya curled into the armchair and stared at the ceiling. She didn't know what would happen next. But she had done what she came to do. She had told the truth. The next morning, the verdict was in. The courtroom buzzed as people filed into their seats. Maya gripped her knees, heart thudding. The foreman stood. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial fraud, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of falsifying corporate documents, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty." Each word landed like thunder. Vivian closed her eyes. Derek didn't blink. The judge issued the sentence. 10 years federal prison. No parole before year 7. Maya exhaled slowly. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters shouted questions. A woman held a sign. "Truth has no age." Julian and Naomi walked Maya to the car. "Are you ready to disappear for a while?" Naomi asked. Maya shook her head. "No, I'm ready to be seen." A week later, Julian stood at a press podium inside Hale Tower. The building was different now, the marble floors cleaner, the silence warmer. He faced a sea of cameras. "Today, we're announcing the Maya Carter Fellowship," he said, "for any young person who dares to ask questions even when they're not supposed to." Maya stood beside him, hands in her pockets. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. That night, Vivian Westmore sat in her cell, replaying the audio that sealed her fate. Not the one she recorded, but Maya's words. "Just because we clean your floors doesn't mean we don't see the dirt." She closed her eyes, not out of shame, out of recognition. She had been seen, and that changed everything. At home, Angela placed a worn folder on the kitchen table. Inside were Maya's college applications. One had a sticky note. "Columbia." "Accepted." Maya smiled. "Do you want to go?" her mom asked. Maya didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "I want to go where people think the truth still matters." Months later, the city skyline blinked in the dusk. Naomi Blake met Julian on the rooftop of Hale Tower. "She's not a janitor's daughter anymore," Naomi said. Julian shook his head. "She never was. We were just too blind to see her." They stood in silence. Then Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a plaque. He placed it on the edge of the rooftop garden. It read, "The truth is quiet, but it lasts." And below it, dedicated to Maya Carter. She didn't just read the fine print. She rewrote the story. In a world where power often shields wrongdoing and silence protects privilege, the story of Maya Carter reminds us that truth can come from the most unexpected places. She was just 16, a janitor's daughter, overlooked and dismissed. Yet her voice stopped a billion-dollar mistake, exposed corruption, and reminded a powerful CEO of his forgotten values. For older Americans who have witnessed decades of shifting ethics and fleeting loyalty, Maya's courage is a call to remember that character still matters. That titles and status may shape perception, but it is integrity often found in quiet corners that defines legacy. This story teaches us to never underestimate the wisdom of the young or the power of those society tries to make invisible. It urges us to look beyond appearances, to question what seems standard, and to listen closely when someone brave enough challenges the system. Most of all, it reminds us that doing what's right may come at a cost, but silence can cost even more. Whether we're sitting in boardrooms or living rooms, truth is our responsibility. And sometimes, the smallest voice carries the loudest truth.